business, and we'll start with that.
Thank you. I mean, TVS supply chain, I would say, was born more as a initial thought process of trying to bring new technology or new logistics side of it. But we established ourselves in a very small way and soon realized that maybe we needed global capabilities. So we ended up actually acquiring capabilities globally and then bringing them, or the hope was that we'll bring them into India very soon. I think in the last maybe 2, 3 years, we have been able to do that. Today, we are maybe 60, 70% global and remaining 30, 35% in India. And I would say an integrated supply chain player rather than just a warehouse or a transportation or a freight forwarding player.
Got it. This what you likely put as acquiring capabilities is both a case study in sort of Indian founders going global, as well as in sort of a case study of an acquisition spree that's worked really well for the TVS logistics and for the outsourcing industry globally. I wanted to sort of start off the discussion, Dinesh, with a couple of questions around how the outsourcing evolution in the last 10 years has panned out and what we have in store for the next 10 to 15 years, right? And one of the big questions for me has always been, what percentage of the overall logistics ecosystem is the headroom for, and what's that market that we are addressing, right? And then of course we can talk about specific industries and how that will pan out.
Yeah, actually, it's a very interesting point. And I think, at least in the last couple of years, I spent a lot of time in analyzing a little bit of data to understand the difference between what I would call the developed markets and the developing markets. And actually, if you look at, and just to give you differentiation also, maybe US, for example, is the highest developed market in terms of outsourcing of the entire supply chain. While UK, I think, is maybe or UK, Europe would be the more higher in terms of what I call as the after production supply chain, right? Meaning the aftermarket side or the sales side. But just to give you an idea of some numbers, if I look at India, we are speaking approximately about, say, 200, 220 billion as the total size, out of which the 3PL or what we call as fully integrated outsourced supply chain would be less than about 10 to 12 billion. Yeah. So if you really look at that kind of a gap, maybe 5-7% of the total market is outsourced, as against maybe a comparable in UK, where I would say it's about 75 to 80% outsourced. Yeah. And that's a norm right across the board, whether it's sectors or players. I think both the 3PL, 4PL players who are in the logistics companies who are in the market, as well as the service providers and the users, take that for granted. So that's a big headroom, and not just true in India. It's also true in most developing markets in Asia.
Yeah, fascinating, right? What you're essentially saying is that from a 10 to 20% range that you see in Asia today to a 75% range in Europe to North America, there is a more than 6 times, 7 times a sort of growth that you would see over the course of the next few years. I just want to sort of draw a contrast to this, right? You see two types of or two schools of thought that are in the market, right? Most companies today, and Pando serves the likes of Siemens on one extreme and the likes of Procter and Gamble on the other extreme. So consumer businesses as well as very B2B businesses on the other extreme, right? And we hear this across the board, the Amazonization of business, the B2C nature of consumer brands being sort of, the thought process, the democratization coming to B2B brands as well, right? And, if you look at what Amazon's done in North America now, or what Flipkart went through this journey in India with e-cart and so on, they said, look, I mean, transportation, we're going to outsource. And then they said, potentially warehousing and transportation, we're going to outsource, or handling, warehousing and transportation, we're going to outsource. And then Amazon's now sort of come a full 360 to now say, I'm going to own everything, right? And if you look at the history of even Indian manufacturers, for example, earlier the thought process was, I will own everything. And then we went through waves of outsourcing. And what it seems to me you're saying is that that wave of outsourcing will go to the other extreme of the pendulum, like what UK is today. But is there a swing back of the pendulum in the case of Amazon and the likes?
Actually, it's very fascinating question, because I call this the curse of the consultants, right? So what typically happens is you have every 10 years cycle where people say, if you outsource, you're actually saving money. And then after 10 years, somebody comes in and says, oh, but if you actually insource because you're large enough to insource now, so you insource it, actually you will save money. So, I call that the cycle of change, which actually goes back and forth.
Yeah.
But having said that, I think the outsourcing really is depending on three things. First is the scale of your own business, or the ability to optimize using your own scale. And secondly, I think you used a very correct word. I would call this the platformization of business, right? So as long as the platformization of an Amazon is capable of taking on the maximum efficiency in that load, then it is good for them to own it.
Correct.
But where I don't have that scale, where I don't have that, so to say, optimization capability, and 90% of the time, even the Amazons of this world will tell you that maybe 50% of their market coverage they can optimize on their own. And in the remaining 50%, they will ride piggyback with others because they can't really optimize either the transportation or the delivery. And of course, last mile delivery is something you can always take a call on because it's a network presence which supports you, especially B2C.
Correct.
But on the B2B, small b space and the B2B space, and honestly, the largest, I would call it non-discovered or non-used market is the B2 small b space,
Absolutely.
which I think suffers the maximum because you really don't have the ability. And the last, the third enabling factor, which I think is now maybe driving this significantly, which you know very well, is the digitization of that platforms. So earlier it was a physical discovery, which was very difficult. And I think in the Indian context, at least when I grew up, I used to know or spend most of my time with what I call transport brokers to understand the transport market. Today, the digitization actually gives the ability for a service provider or for a user to have that direct connect to the user.
Yeah, fascinating. This whole idea of, and we keep saying this to our clients as well, right? The world is moving from a competitive advantage sort of standpoint to a collaborative advantage standpoint. And it's fascinating to see, even if you look at different industries where outsourcing is penetrated, I think FMCG, consumer electronics, or FMCD, etc., has sort of been at the lower end of the spectrum. Automotive has sort of been at the higher end of the spectrum, right? And even in the CPG space, Indian CPG manufacturers are today saying, how do I sort of, as you said, platformize my supply chain in a way that if I operate on a certain technology platform, and whether that's transport management or warehouse management, my actual operating platform is on one platform. How do I sort of get my 3PL partners, my transport partners, my warehouse partners to also engage with me on the same platform? And how do three of us, who might be sort of competitors or collaborators in the larger sense, so who are on the same platform, then sort of get visibility into our overall operations? Well, not SKU level visibility, but load level visibility, to be able to then say, is there stuff that I can do together in some sense, right? So it's a fascinating evolution, both in terms of outsourcing, driving digitization, and digitization driving outsourcing, and those complementarities are coming out as well. Right. One aspect of outsourcing, in some sense, has and its a relationship with technology, has been, and I want to point out again what you pointed out, which is, you said we wanted to bring in new processes and technology, and then you corrected yourself to say, no, actually processes, not technology. How has that changed in the last 10, 15 years, Dinesh? Because when we talk to customers and those that want to outsource completely or a large part of their operations, they say, look, I mean, I'm giving it off to, an expert in the field, and they will help me do this collaboration and all of this. But they say, look, I want visibility into those operations as well, right? While I hand it off, I want to get access to some of this visibility, and vice versa. You're saying that once you take on the quote unquote headache of managing the entire ecosystem, the problems continue to exist within a 3PL as well. And so, what is the degree of digitization that we're seeing both with customers, suppliers, and within the 3PL itself?
It's been a fascinating journey even for me, because as I said, when I first started, or when we were starting in our journey, it was just trust, which people outsourced first. Then they actually started looking at better capacity utilization and better process efficiency, which this will bring to the table. I would say as early as maybe 2012 or 13, at least not just from an Indian side, but even globally, there was a significant talk of saying that, how can they give visibility? That was the first question which we were asked, saying, can you give visibility? And second is, can you actually provide an integrated solution which gives that visibility? like you rightly said, it's a piece flow, right? So typically it always used to be in the production side where piece flow was looked at. But then when to the delivery side and as to the consumption side, people wanted to know all the way up to the user or the final consumer, am I got the visibility of what's happening, etc. That I think is the first start. The last bit or the later bit of it was enjoying the benefit or the full value of creating an integrated supply chain. So just to give you an idea, the total cost calculation, 90% of the time, most customers, and I always call that as, you have to reach high enough in the organization for you to be able to win a business. Because if you are talking with the transport provider or the transport contractor, he is not going to be interested to outsource everything. So as you go every level higher, and today maybe the CEO level is what looks at the supply chain, then you definitely distinguish yourself or differentiate yourself only based on your ability to provide the visibility to the right technology.
Got it. Got it. Fascinating, right? And the other sort of angle to this, and I'm sure you've seen this evolution in your journey as well, how supply chain as a function has slowly sort of climbed the ladder into the board as well, right? Earlier, even with larger organizations, it was seen as a cost center. It was seen as something that was a necessary evil to deal with. Sales and marketing were the more fancy things to do, and manufacturing was the core, and logistics was sort of an extension of all of this, right? Has with more attention coming into logistics and supply chain, both from a cost standpoint, I think diesel rates and the pandemic have played a role in that, but also from a service level and a consumption standpoint, right? And so a sort of margin standpoint, has that played a role positively in outsourcing, or is that more increased attention meaning that companies in turn want to hold back and hold that as a core competency in terms of their overall supply chain?
I have to tell you this joke. So when we were talking about setting up this business, and in 2000 I had gone to one of a very senior executive and told them that this is a business in itself.
Yeah.
So he actually looked at me and he said, "Oh, really? Do you think there is any potential in this business?" That was a statement he actually asked me, and I said, "No, it's a huge market, out of 100,000 crores." And then I was thinking to myself, and he's a very good, capable person, but he never thought of supply chain as being a center or a focus, where you have to have that process. But things have changed dramatically. Like you rightly said, today supply chain is looked at the CEO level, and this is right across companies. And the reason you said is two things. One, I would say that availability factor has made a big differentiation from the consumption side, and also even from a production side, because today nobody wants inventory to be carried unnecessarily.
Of course.
The second big change which has happened as to why this is embracing of what I would call visibility and supply chain as a focus is differentiation is lacking unless you are able to make that available. And that's why sometimes people think, oh, I can't outsource everything. But really then the differentiation is just not on product and service, but also on the quality of delivery. That I think makes it sense. So these three factors have kind of created this perfect marriage or perfect storm. And I think the pandemic and and in fact in India, I have to mention GST was a big game changer, because without that, India was not a single market, right? So it was like the 19 markets or 20 markets, and decisions were made more on tax reasons rather than supply chain efficiency reasons. So it's a big step forward from what I have seen in the past. And that big step took maybe 5-6 years happening. But in the last 2 years, I would say literally it's kind of taken, I would say, priority status in terms of focus across all boards.
Yeah, fascinating. And, policy, as you rightly pointed out, plays a big role in sort of even the attention that this gets and the degree of this thing. And in turn, sort of, I think inflation and the diesel prices push policy to in turn give it that degree of focus, right? Where is that evolving, Dinesh? And I know you play a pivotal role across in sort of driving policy as well. So what are you hearing from both state and center on driving outsourcing?
I think there is two strong, I would call it, drivers. First is what the logistics cost in itself, because I think basically it's just an enabler. I mean, like Atmanirbhar Bharat or whatever we are talking about as production capability or the PLIs, etc. They are not going to be successful unless we are able to get the supply chain efficiency and the cost down. So that I think is one big driver of policy. And I think this is, I mean, you heard the Prime Minister mention in his speech, I think 5 times supply chain, right? So it is that level of involvement in terms of importance. The next, I would call it, which drives is commitments to environment. So if you look at the Paris Accord, or if you look at changes, I think this multimodal concept of bringing in road, rail, connectivity, making sure we are using water or waterways, etc. All of it is also a big step forward from a policy making perspective. Obviously, India, if we want to be competitive, I think the only way out is to keep reducing our supply chain cost. I am a strong believer that supply chain is not going to just reduce, cost is not going to just reduce by creating infrastructure. It is going to be what I would call the e-digital connectivity, which is going to make a big difference. And last but not the least, I would call it the percentage of outsourcing, because still, I believe capacity utilization, even on the road, for example, we are still speaking about 60, 69%. While in a developed market, we are speaking as a normal break even 80, 85%.
80, 85. Fascinating. The e-digital connectivity, right? And you say that almost lightly. And this is, with IMAI, a lot of the folks who are watching this are also potentially entrepreneurs and founders looking to sort of start up in different spaces, right? What is a digital supply chain opportunity, which will aid in the improvement of outsourcing and in turn, which will benefit from increasing outsourcing in India, Dinesh? What are some areas that, for example, TVS Logistics would be interested in sort of pursuing, and what would be ideas for founders to pursue as well?
See, I call this as two ways of looking at the same issue, right? One is from an internal perspective, so I call it the entrepreneur, and one is from an external perspective, which is entrepreneur, right? So, I mean, you can approach this from both sides of the spectrum. So, if, for example, I'm a supply chain player or a logistics player, then I am really looking at it saying, how can I create that wow factor in terms of my technology solution? And in a way, the ePOD or the digital connectivity is something which I take for granted today.
Yeah.
But having said that, I mean, including you, I think have found beautiful ways of slicing and dicing the market to come in and say, can I do better in one aspect of it so that I differentiate myself from somebody else? So I think you use the right word. It's competition, meaning you compete, but you also work together. And this cohabitation of an entrepreneur coming with a technology solution to a service provider, I think definitely, I mean, at least in our case, we have already worked with 6 entrepreneurs who have provided both technology solutions, and I would call it technical solutions for integration. The third aspect of it is the platformization also lends itself to networking capability. I think the problem I see in the most thought processes, they think technology is going to replace a physical process. No, the physical process still has to go on. The technology not just enables but enhances the efficiency of the physical process.
Correct.
As long as that input is borne in mind by any entrepreneur, and he or she partners with either a good service provider or a user, and I call that the anchor customer approach or the anchor user approach, then I think there's a great opportunities available. And I will make one more comment. I think people tend to look at optimization as being just a solution. But we shouldn't forget that scale and optimization go together. So either you buy scale or you partner scale. That's how I would look at it.
Fascinating. What's the and this is a question from someone in the audience as well. For anybody who's pitching outsourcing to a potential customer, for whom, let's say, logistics cost as a percentage of revenue is in the 8-10%. So it's significant enough for it to be a board level priority or a CEO level priority, right? What's the pitch for outsourcing? What are the top 3 things that why something considered core should be outsourced, like logistics?
I think while we may use all fancy jargon, finally everything boils down to cost, right? So if you don't make a differentiation in terms of the cost, I think you're going to find it very difficult to be able to convince somebody to outsource. But having said that, just cost today doesn't give you the ability to open doors, right? So like you said, the ability to integrate, ability to provide visibility across multiple, not just modes of delivery, but also modes until the end of the consumer consumption plan. And last but not the least, the ability to continuously improve. So I think the biggest challenge which you solve for when you go with an outsourcing proposal is to say, I can keep on improving the efficiency at the same cost. It may not be that I'm giving you a significant cost benefit when I come in. Yes, there could be some cost benefits because of the visibility. And ultimately, the final sale is when I'm able to convince a customer to look at the total cost, not look at optimizing individual elements of the cost.
Got it. Got it. Interesting. One of the things that you said, and I've heard, yeah, I don't know if this is Sundaram Clayton or one of the factories where there's a plaque about one piece flow.
Yes.
Right. And you said it lightly, but I want to do a double click on that for a second. How manufacturing has extended to delivery right up to the consumption point in terms of one piece flow. Right. There's also an interesting book written by an MIT professor about it. I just want to do a double click for the audience. When you say supply chain, the concept of one piece flow has been extended to supply chain. What does that mean? Because I think the three things that you said, which is cost reduction, total cost of ownership reduction, increasing efficiency, and digitization, platformization, has an impact on one piece flow and vice versa. Can you do a quick double click on that?
So, I mean, I'll just take an aftermarket example, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to name the manufacturer, but we were speaking to somebody who's manufacturing something as mundane as pipes, right?
Yeah.
So, if you say that from the production center
Mhm.
to a distributor, then coming to a retailer, and the retailer has multiple clients to whom he sells to. Somebody who is in a house, somebody who is in a residential complex, somebody who is actually building a new premises, so who is buying, large volumes. For them, they would like to have that one piece flow to understand what happens to the component once it leaves the factory, all the way into that final where it is getting fitted into a location. And typically, I'm talking about a very simple process flow where there are only 3 or 4 players in it. But I would say most components, FMCG, for example, would have 5, 6 people who are coming into this play. And at each level, there is inventory. At each level, there is wastage. And finally, there is what I would call huge cross movement. And I can tell you this, I have done, we have worked with companies where we find that somewhere between 2 to 3% of the supply chain cost is just cross movement of goods from one part of India to another part of India.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Even in CPG today, what they would call primary movement versus secondary movement, right? The secondary going into their customer, in terms of value, it's 2/3 and 1/3. And so
Exactly.
2/3 of movement is inventory movement between their nodes itself. Fascinating. If we were to sort of, and this is crystal ball gazing, Dinesh, and there are very few people who probably can do this, especially to do with supply chain outsourcing in India. Where are we headed? And I know you gave me the upper limit in some sense of the 75%. You also spoke about the swing back potentially that will keep happening. But what is the future for supply chain outsourcing in India, especially given, let's say, e-vehicles, electric vehicles coming in? There are different modes of transportation that is driving this, and of course, modalities sort of playing a role as well, right? Where will we land in 10 to 15 years?
Let me preface my answer in 2 ways. One, you should not forget that the cost of the assets are going to continuously go up. And especially like you said, if e-vehicles comes in, if the port infrastructure and the airport infrastructure further improves, and railways will have to keep investing on expanding their infrastructure. So that cost has to be paid back. And therefore, there is no option for a country like India, but to continue to increase efficiency. So that's one core reason as to why outsourcing will continue to go up. The second aspect of it is coming from the digitization activity, right? So the reason why people will outsource, and maybe companies like Pando are well on that journey in terms of making sure you are able to deliver optimum solutions or optimizing solutions along with the pure vanilla service solution. And that's where you actually start seeing the true value of outsourcing. The platformization benefit starts to kick in. So, and like you said, the network starts getting built up.
Correct.
So I think people with scale can afford to insource because they have the ability to work with it. And you will actually find smaller and smaller service providers becoming partners with larger service providers, not necessarily being owned by them, but actually, partnering with them the right way so that we actually can develop the ecosystem. In fact, I would say, firm belief is India will lose its unique advantage if we kill livelihood businesses of today, especially the transport sector. We have to somehow work with them, bring them into the digital journey, and they are more than capable of taking on a digital journey than we think. Maybe it will take them time. No, not at all. And I strongly believe that outsourcing will increase in India till it reaches a plateau, maybe in about 7-8 years. And then again, the second cycle will start of prediction.
Got it. Got it. Fascinating. And I'm sure, the 3-4 things that we've discussed, right? One is policy evolution, technology evolution, cost pressure, service level as a function, and really just entrepreneurial ambition more than anything, right? Whether that's intrapreneurial ambition or entrepreneurial ambition. I think one thing that, at least in the few years that I've been in business, I've consistently seen year on year go up. It's just the ability of both large, individuals within large enterprises, as well as individuals outside large enterprises, to sort of see a big vision, bet on ideas, be able to sort of take this thing, and the reversibility of some of these decisions is actually fairly significant as well, right? Because if it was something that it was very hard to sort of pull out of, therefore experimentation sort of took a hit, it would be hard, versus we're seeing the opposite, where you're actually seeing more and more people willing to invest in ideas as well, right? Fascinating. So thanks for doing this, Dinesh. Appreciate your time. I don't think we have any more questions, and we have a couple of minutes, so we'll wrap up. Thanks for taking the time, Dinesh.
Not at all. Thank you, Nitin, and likewise enjoyed the session. So look forward to more sessions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nitin and Mr. Dinesh, for an engaging discussion. And a special thanks to both of you for making up time and coming here and making this possible.
Thank you.
And also another thank you goes out to our attendees as well, who are here with us today. Thank you so much, everyone. And please stay tuned, as we'll be back with the next session soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.